Hi, virtual students. We are starting Unit 2 today, which is maybe the most famous topic of economics regarding supply and demand. So, anyway, we're going to get started here. The notes that you are following along with will look something like this. Um, again, it says supply and demand, topic 3 at the top. We're going to jump around a little bit. We're talking some law of demand today, and then we're going to move down to these demand shifters before we talk about supply in our next part. Okay, so let's get started here. So understanding what the law of demand tells us is probably going to be the most important thing. And what you're going to find out is you actually know more stuff than you might realize. So go ahead and take a quick second um, and try to list something for each of these parts here. All right. Okay, so part one is asking you to list something that you can't necessarily afford. So probably something along the lines of like a vacation. Maybe some of you guys, a typical answer for high school kids is a car. It's something like that that I'd like to do, but I can't afford it. Number two is something that's probably obviously a little bit cheaper and you can afford it, but you're choosing not to buy it. So, like for example, maybe that would be going out to eat, every weekend or something along those lines where I just don't feel like doing that, so I'm going to spend my money on something else. Okay, so you've got money to do it, you're just choosing it to spend on something else. And then part three is something that if you had more money you'd buy less of, so something like that you buy because you have to. So maybe that would be you could say like the school lunch because you're here and you have to buy that lunch with the lunch money that you have. Or you could say a typical answer would be like ramen noodles or frozen pizzas, and some people say fast food or whatever. So it's something that you buy because it's cheap, and you're able to save money doing it. Okay, so you know a whole lot about the law of demand before we even start. We're going to throw in some definitions, talk about how we can draw this on a graph, and go forward from there here today. Okay, so let's first of all define this definition of demand. All right, and uh, the definition is it says that it's the amount of goods and services that we are able and willing to buy. So going back to that daily blog, right? I'm unable to buy, a fancy vacation or whatever. So I really don't demand that as far as my demand curve is going to be concerned when we see that in a second. And on number two, we said, well, I'm not willing to buy those things that I'm going to choose to spend my money on something else. Okay. There's also some other factors in there that make it so whether or not we become willing or whether or not we become able to buy stuff. But I've got to have both. Okay. There's some stuff that I just don't want to buy because I don't want to. And there's some stuff that I don't buy or I'm not able to buy because my income is not large enough at a certain time period. Okay. So what we know is, okay, since we know that our incomes are limited and also we can choose how to spend our money in several different ways, we know that as the price of a good goes up, our ability and willingness to buy goes down. Okay, so as something becomes more expensive, one of two things eventually happens. Either one, I can't afford it anymore, or number two, I choose not to buy it anymore. That would be the willingness, right? And everybody has a little bit of a different looking, if you wanted to put numbers on it, a little bit of a different looking demand curve for different stuff, right? Depending on who you are, what your preferences are, you're going to demand stuff different than someone next to you. Okay. Now, keeping that law of demand in mind, right? We know the two things that affect it. We've already mentioned how much money you earn. Okay. So we can refer to that as your income. All right. And those of you that have jobs or have had jobs, you know that when the day after you get a paycheck, you behave differently than the last day before you get a paycheck, especially if you've spent your money leading up to that particular point, right? How much money you have in your pocket is going to affect what you're able and willing to buy. Substitution wise also affects it. That's just a fancy way of saying, listen, I can spend my money on basically whatever I want. Sometimes if something becomes too expensive, I'm going to go buy something else. All right. So let's get started here. We're going to draw this stuff on a graph. All right. And you are down below that where we just wrote that substitute and real income effect. So our graph no matter what, is going to have two axes. Our y-axis is always going to be price. And I'm going to label it with numbers here just to be able to visualize what's going on. A lot of times we'll be able to eliminate these numbers in the future. We'll put them on here just so we can see exactly what's going on. I'm going to label my x-axis here quantity. All right, but again, a lot of times we somewhat ignore these numbers because we know the concept of as price goes up, we're going to demand less. Okay, but I'll put numbers on there just for visualization's sake. All right, in our demand curve, as we just said, as the price goes up, so as we're up here, we're going to demand less. So in this case, we're talking about a lower quantity. Okay, so price goes up, we demand less. Now, as price goes down, we're going to demand a higher quantity. So our demand curve is always going to have a slope that is going to be referred to as downward sloping left to right. All right. And again, the numbers are hypothetical. Again, if you wanted to say, okay, let's apply the law of demand here. Well, if the price of whatever product we're talking about is 6, we would demand on my graph approximately 30. If the price was 3, we would demand approximately 50. Okay, and so again, that price changing, the quantity is increasing with it when it goes down, the quantity is decreasing as the price goes up. Now, this is kind of common sense. And again, kind of the nice thing about it is the common sense has just told us that, you know what, we can make a pretty accurate prediction, not exactly how much we'll buy, but we can be confident saying, hey, listen, if that price goes up, the quantity demanded is going to decrease. Okay, so price goes up, quantity demanded decreases, and we can also say the vice versa. So when that price changes, we expect the quantity demanded to change. Now, some things make us change our mind. Okay, and so you're flipping your paper over. Up at the top, it says demand shifters. So skip over the supply shifters, go to the top, and find the demand shifter spot. So you're right here, okay, shifts in the demand curve. And then we're going to fill in these boxes down below here with 6 different things once we get to that particular point, okay? Now, there are some things that do make us change our mind, okay? And when we change our mind, it's going to shift how we operate on some things too. So it may make us completely shift in what we want to buy. I'm going to hold off on labeling these with numbers this time, okay? So we've got our price still, we've got our quantity still, and then our demand is right here. Now, if we have something happen that's going to make us increase our demand, okay, we're going to shift it to the right. And what can make us increase our demand? Well, if we make more money, think about what you would buy first if you made more money. Well, that's increasing your demand to the right. Okay, or if we have something that is going to decrease our demand for stuff, so we kind of said if we earn less money, it could decrease our demand for stuff as well. We increase to the right, we decrease to the left. And I'll write these on here just so you can visualize what you're doing and you can add them to your own notes. All right, there's an abbreviation we can use called IRDL to help us keep track of which way to move things. That stands for increase right, decrease left. It's pretty straightforward, okay? If you sound that IRDL out, it should sound like ERDL. It's just a nice little mnemonic device to help us remember in the future where we're moving things if we get confused in a test situation. Okay, so let's talk about some things that can change your mind. I gave you one, obviously, with the change in your income, but let's see if you can come up with a couple more. Okay, so hopefully you're kind of thinking like, well, you know, depending on how old you are, that's going to affect what you want to buy. It could be a time of year. You know, in the winter we buy different stuff than in the summer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Any of those things will work. Again, things that change your mind. Okay, let's talk about the 6 different things that we can apply to this change in the shift in demand. Okay, so the first one is going to be a change in population. We've kind of talked about this graph as just looking at a individual person and how much you're going to demand. Well, we're going to assume that we could basically take a survey of all people and say, okay, we can take all, we'll just use Elkhart as an example, 150,000 people, and we could say this is how much people will demand for stuff. Well, when we get more people are going to want to buy more stuff. And so we can shift our demand to the right. Change in population is going to increase our supply or demand to the right. A decrease in population is going to shift it to the left. Number two is a change in income. We've referenced this a couple different times. If you are making more money, it's going to change what you're able and willing to buy. If you lose money, it's going to change what you are willing and able to buy. And again, this is going to be shown, all right, you can keep referencing this by these shifts in demand. We also change our mind. In certain cases, we get things become super popular. Obviously, in the world of the COVID vaccine, something that's happened is we have increased our demand for vaccinations. Not everybody wants to get a vaccination, but people have changed their mind and said, okay, I want to get a vaccine for this because I want this stuff to end. So that would be a change in taste and preference. Some less dramatic change in preferences. I'm not sure if you guys would be familiar with Beanie Babies or Tickle Me Elmos. You're probably much more familiar with silly bands. And when you guys were in younger elementary school classes, there was a huge increase in demand for silly bands for that short period of time. Okay, so again, we can change our mind. We can demand more or less stuff based on what's popular and maybe even what's unpopular in those cases as well. Substitutes ones, it's an easy concept to understand. It's sometimes a difficult one to wrap your head around. So, for example, if we'll use these two examples, McDonald's versus Burger King, as substitutes. Well, since they're extremely similar products, if the price of McDonald's increases, I'm going to increase my demand for Burger King. So kind of keep in mind, like I'm not going to go to a McDonald's as much, it's too expensive. I'm going to increase my demand for Burger King. If McDonald's has a sale, right, and they put stuff on sale, I don't know, 3 for $5 Big Macs or whatever, right? They've lowered their price of Big Macs. Well, now I'm going to go to McDonald's, but I'm going to decrease my demand for Burger King. So just make sure you speak in terms of what you are trying to say. We also have goods that go together. We call them complementary goods. And those are things, this is like the grocery store trick. So the grocery store will put hamburger buns on sale for 15 cents, right? Okay, so hamburger buns are on sale, and now I got to buy hamburgers, right? And they make a good profit on hamburgers. Okay, so they want to decrease the price of hamburger buns, which will increase our demand for hamburgers. Okay, and so they can use that kind of against us and make us think that we're saving some money, which in actuality we're actually giving the grocery store more money because they're making a bigger profit on the product that is more expensive. Hamburger is more expensive than hamburger buns. Okay, the last thing is changing consumer expectations and predictions. Okay, so if you've ever been in the situation where gas prices have gone up at a few different gas stations, and then you go and buy gas really quick at a gas station where it's not more expensive, that's a good example of this. Because if one gas station raises their prices, usually we see prices increase later on at the other ones. So if I know one gas stations raise their price, I'm going to increase my demand right now for another gas station's gasoline, okay? Because I feel like it's going to raise the price in the very near future. All right. Just to kind of tie this all together, remember, and I'm going to draw some quick numbers here. You don't have to draw this graph, but just so we know what we're visualizing, we have a demand graph, and I'm just going to label this 2, 3, and $1. This is our price axis. Here's our quantity, and I'm just going to label it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just to kind of get this visualized here a little bit so we can know what this graph is showing us. If I increase my demand, let's say I make more money. So right now I demand at $2. Let's say the price was set at $2. I demand 3. Okay. So let's increase our demand here and see what happens to how much we demand. So if we increase to the right, well, now at $3, okay, I'm sorry, at $2, let's erase that. At that same price, now I demand 5. Okay, because I make more money, I can afford more stuff, I want to buy more stuff, right? For whatever one of those shifters might get applied. Let's say that I decrease my demand. So let's say I make less money and I have less demand. All right. Well, if I decrease my demand at $2, right, I can only demand one product at this particular point. And so all we're predicting is saying, well, if we increase our demand, we're going to want to buy more stuff at the same price. If for whatever reason we decrease our demand, we're going to want to buy less at that given price. And we can show it on a graph. And we know the law of demand is true because we can prove the income effect, and we know that the substitution effect exists. Last daily blog for this part of the unit here. Go ahead and take a shot at these two questions. You're going to increase or decrease the demand for each. Okay, let's assume that all chalkboards inside Concord High School are removed to prevent chalk dust allergies. What's this going to do for the demand for chalk by Concord teachers? Hopefully you say a decrease in demand. Probably best represented by a change in taste and preferences, all right, to show that. Number two, assume it was announced that the price of prom tickets are going to increase in 1 week. What does that do for the demand for prom tickets today? Hopefully you're tying this in with our gas prices scenario, and you're saying an increase in demand today for those prom tickets, okay, because I want to buy them before the price goes up. Okay, the one thing that we didn't necessarily mention yet, and I want to be clear because it takes some practice, is that when there's just a change in price, okay, when just the price changes, we don't shift our line. That is said very clearly on your notes. And the reason we don't do that is we simply know the law of demand to be true. So we know that when the price changes, okay, we're not going to shift our situation for that particular product. McDonald's price goes up. I'm just going to buy less McDonald's. I haven't changed my opinion about McDonald's, but I'm not going to change it. I know I'm going to buy less. I'm going to increase my demand for Burger King. Okay, price of McDonald's goes up. I just know that I'm going to buy less, right? Price of McDonald's increases. I'm going to buy less. Okay, the price goes from 2 to 3. I'm going to buy less. Burger King, though, I'm going to increase my demand because it's a substitute good. Thanks for paying attention. Email me with questions. It's an important unit. Don't let yourself get behind. Make sure you do the practice problems, and we'll be in touch.